All the day long, when the rain will shine, she's a part of the assembly line. She's making history, working for victory. Rosie keeps a sharp lookout for sabotage. Sitting up there on the fuselage, that little friend can do more than a man can do. Rosie, Rosie's got a boyfriend, Johnny. Welcome back, my little gremlins. Here we have a Chapter 24 review in which we are going to go from the 20s to 30s and talk a little bit more about world events and how the United States goes to eventually get involved in World War II. So, we start with everybody's favorite character from this time period and everybody's obsession, and History Channel's obsession really, is Hitler. Okay, Adolf Hitler, he goes from a fast rise to power. He is a soldier in World War I. He narrowly escapes death a few times. He, in the 1920s, tries to rally up support to kind of overthrow the government. He is jailed, and then he writes his famous book, Mein Kampf, My Struggle, and from there he becomes a little bit more of a better orator, bigger follower, bigger following, I should say, and then he gets enough support to essentially be given the chancellorship in 1932, because that's how bad things are in Germany. If you remember back to last year, how inflation has played a role. And once he's given the chance, there's no going back. Okay, he becomes chancellor, and from there he gets some things done for Germany, like canceling those war reparations from the Treaty of Versailles, which is really going to screw up the Dawes Plan. But he has a very fast rise to power. The unfortunate policy that the Allies are going to use with Hitler is the idea of appeasement. So we'll keep that in mind. We'll see what that means, but we'll come down a little bit. Here's some more information just about Adolf Hitler. As I mentioned before, he was a soldier in World War I, sweet mustache, and then he goes on to become a really good orator, and people will listen to him. And that's obviously a very scary thing. Here's his dating profile app here, his picture, and his book, I should say, Mein Kampf. Just kidding about the dating app. Wasn't around back then. Disclaimer. Okay. A couple of other really cool stories before I get into the nitty-gritty stuff. In the 1936 Olympics, you say, okay, what do the Olympics have to do with Hitler? What do they have to do with anything we're talking about here? They have a lot to do with what this era is all about. The 1936 Olympics were in Berlin, which is in Germany. This was Hitler's chance to show the world how he's doing with Germany. His country is on display. And one of the big stories that comes out of this Olympics is how a grandson of a slave, Jesse Owens, from the USA, a runner, he will debunk the idea of Hitler's Aryan superiority. Okay, if you know anything or remember anything about Hitler from last year, and that Hitler's beliefs that the Aryan race is superior to all others, and that he certainly didn't want, Jesse Owens, a African American, showing him up in his own country at his own Olympic Games. But nonetheless, Jesse Owens goes on to win multiple events for gold medals in Berlin, along with a few other guys as well that are African American. And this really is hurtful to Hitler, and obviously just proves to everybody, hey, listen, his idea of Aryan superiority is not true. Nonetheless, okay, let's go on to talk about, the United States. The United States, if you remember, during his rise to power, we were really worrying about ourselves. We called ourselves isolationists. However, we did last week just talk about how that wasn't exactly true. Although we will pass some neutrality acts, okay, in 1935, 36, and 37, the neutrality acts, exactly what they sound like, okay? They're keeping America neutral, okay? We're not going to sell any guns to countries that are at war. All right. We're not going to give any money to nations that are at war. So we're trying to preserve our neutrality to stay out of a future conflict, because it's pretty apparent something's about to go down in Europe. All right. America realizes Hitler, is a pretty bad dude. There's some other guys, fascist leaders as well, like Stalin or Mussolini. Okay, it's pretty clear something is about to happen, and the United States wants to ensure its neutrality, and Americans want this, right? In the 1930s, when Roosevelt takes over, FDR, we have a Great Depression to worry about, and so we're not exactly all about getting involved. We Talked about the Washington Naval Conference and how the Kellogg-Briand Pact were two examples of how the United States was involved in world affairs, even though we call ourselves isolationists. As things start to heat up in Europe, okay, we go from complete neutrality to FDR, as we call cash and carry. We said, all right, listen, we will sell goods to countries that are at war, but we're not going to bring our goods to you. Okay, if you want to trade with us, you have to come to the United States, pay us, and then take it back to your country. That is an alteration of our neutrality acts. Okay, we're moving a little bit closer to being involved, but again, we want to prevent being involved. We want to prevent that Lusitania being sunk from World War I by telling these countries, come here to the United States, pay us for our goods, and take it back on your own ships. Okay, so as we know, things, okay, are going to start to heat up. Now, the Nye Commission is done in 1934. Now, this guy, Bill Nye the Science Guy, just kidding, okay? The Nye Commission was done to kind of go back and figure out why exactly did we participate in World War I. You say, wait, Mr. Mueller, we talked about the reasons why the United States got involved. It was because of the sinking of those ships like the Lusitania, the Sussex, and the Arabic, the unrestricted submarine warfare, and the Zimmerman note. That's what you told me. Yes, true. However, we are re-examining the real reason, the real push. And what this Nye Commission comes up with is that the American bankers and arm manufacturers were the real ones that pushed for war for the United States to get involved. You say, why? Well, think about it, okay, how they benefit from war. We talked about how we pay for the war through things like bonds, for example. There's money to be made in a war. And the arms manufacturing, remember we were selling stuff to countries at war, and then obviously once we were involved, we make a lot more money by producing stuff. It's no secret that during times of war, a country's economy usually does pretty well because of the level of production, the level of employment, etc. Now, this Nye Commission in 1934 angers people a little bit, okay? They're not happy with that. They want to be told, well, we got involved to save democracy, etc. They don't want to know that people wanted to make a profit off the war. So that's exactly why we passed those neutrality acts to keep us completely out of war. But as we know, they're going to eventually drag us in. We know the Great Depression is going to happen. We know that America wants to worry about ourselves. We know that unemployment is going to rise. And with guys like Hitler, guys like Mussolini and Stalin, totalitarian governments, things are going down. Now, a totalitarian government, if you don't remember, real quick, it's a form of government in which there's only one party that you can basically vote for. All others are banned. Not very democratic. The two totalitarian states in the beginning, first was Italy, the rise of Mussolini, and then Hitler. Okay, Hitler's idol, if you will, his fascist idol was Mussolini. There's some other guys as well we'll talk about in a second, but this guy right here in Spain, Francisco Franco, he is another totalitarian or fascist leader who gets the help and support of both Mussolini and Hitler in his Spanish Civil War, which we may have talked about last year. Now, the Spanish Civil War does not involve the United States. We can remain completely neutral. However, this is like a dress rehearsal for World War II, and it occurs in 1939. Spain, once their little revolution, their civil war is over, I should say, they will become a new fascist state. So another fascist leader in Europe. Things start to really fall apart when Germany starts to take land that is not theirs. They are violating terms from the Treaty of Versailles. The Treaty of Versailles, if you remember, ended World War I. They were stripped of land, like the Rhineland, okay, a big industrial piece of old Germany. Well, they take it back, okay, and they start reindustrializing, okay, and the argument is, well, you have to give it back to us because it's helping our economy. Okay, fine. Then Hitler starts to militarize. You say, wait, you can't do that. The Treaty of Versailles said you can't do that. Well, building up the military once again is producing jobs, giving people work, and that's helping our economy. Okay, fine. Then Hitler marches into Austria and says, listen, there's a lot of people in Austria, okay, that are, speak German, are of the same culture, and so they belong to be part of us. Okay, fine. They annex Austria. Then he marches into what's called the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia, a piece of it, and he says, listen, I just want this little piece of Czechoslovakia, and that's it. Now the Allies, England and France, no United States, they they meet with Hitler at Munich. Okay, and they say, listen, what's the deal here? Hitler says, Sudetenland should really be part of Germany. I promise, this is my last territorial demand. Cross my heart, hope to die. What are the Allies doing by giving him all these pieces of land? They're doing appeasement. And now we mentioned that a little bit earlier. The policy of appeasement, what is it? Giving in to an aggressor in order to prevent war. Why? Why do we allow Hitler to get so powerful? Why do we allow him to do the things he has done so far? Because the Allies are so scared of preventing another world war, they give in to his demands. And the policy of appeasement is not a good one. Okay, it's like if you've ever watched your little sister, brother, or cousin, niece or nephew before, while mom and dad are out, and they tell you before they leave, listen, little Johnny cannot have whatever it is, ice cream or potato chips or the video games, whatever it is. There's something they can't have. But as soon as mom and dad leave, they walk out the door. That little kid asks you a million times, can I have this? Can I have that? Can I have this? Can I have that? They know they can get away with it if they ask a million times. And because we're running short on patience, we say, listen, yes, for 5 minutes, you can have this, you can do that. But once you've done that, once you've appeased that child, once you've appeased Hitler, you've given in. And you're only going to give in more and more. It's not the end, it's only the beginning. And that is the dangerous part of appeasement. Okay, so besides Hitler and Mussolini, we have Stalin in Russia. He's another totalitarian leader. You have Hideki Tojo, who is the militaristic leader in Japan, even though there is a emperor who is basically, powerless to Hideki Tojo. All these totalitarian leaders are rising to power. Okay, we talked about Hitler taking all that land. The Soviet Union, okay, soon is going to take some land as well to provide some security for them. Mussolini, okay, has a lot of support in Italy, and they all have a friend in Francisco Franco in Spain. What about Japan? What are they doing in the 1930s? Well, they're fed up with being, the last kid picked in kickball. They want to be an imperial power. Now, they've come a long way. We opened their doors in 1954, if you remember. Okay, you had Commodore Matthew Perry who showed up there, and the Treaty of Kanagawa, which opened up their ports to trading. Now, when the United States shows up in 1854, they were very behind. They had been shut off for the world for a long time, and they chose to go the opposite from what China had done. China had resisted the West. Japan said, let's learn from them. Japan will hire experts to come from America, from Germany, from England, and learn to modernize their military, to modernize their education system and postal system, etc. And then, the turn of the century, the 1900s, okay, by 1910, they've beaten Russia in the Russo-Japanese War. They've colonized Korea. They're on the winning side of World War I, but they still feel like they're being treated like a third world country. And so they're done playing nice. All right, they invade Manchuria in 1931, which is a clear violation of the Treaty of Versailles. And Japan says, League of Nations, you can't tell us what to do. And the League of Nations says, yes, well, if you do this, we're going to kick you out of the League of Nations. Well, so be it, okay? There's no standing army to stop them. And they are becoming a serious threat in Asia. As far as Italy, okay, they also invade another territory. They invade Ethiopia in 1935. A clear violation of the Treaty of Versailles and the League of Nations. They too are reprimanded by the League of Nations, and they say, you know what, there's nothing you can do about it. And so Italy and Japan withdraw from the League of Nations. Things are heating up. Okay, so let's get to this brink of war here. We talked about Hitler and his territorial demands and how the policy of appeasement has failed thus far. Now, things start to get worse, okay? Hitler has clearly taken so much from the Allies, but the last straw comes in Poland. Poland is invaded by Germany September 1st, 1939. Once he does that, okay, he uses his blitzkrieg or lightning war, okay, his fast war techniques. There's no choice by the Allies. They say, you know what, Munich was a failure. Appeasement is a failure. England and France have no choice but to declare war on Hitler's Germany after he invades Poland. World War II has begun. Okay, things are on like Donkey Kong. Now, a very surprising turn of events here. Hitler and Stalin. Now, these two guys hate each other. They can't stand each other. You would think that, oh, well, they're both totalitarian leaders. They must love each other. They must be big fans of each other. No, quite the opposite. All right, they actually criticize each other, probably almost jealous of each other because of their power. Hitler certainly envies how much power and how much territory Stalin has. And Stalin, I don't know if he's jealous, but he certainly doesn't view Hitler as an equal, okay, a lesser, if you will. But the turn of events, the surprise that no one was expecting, is that they sign a non-aggression pact in 1939, the same year that Hitler invades Poland. Hitler says, listen, Stalin, let's do this. Why don't we split Poland in half? You take the West, Hitler takes the West, Stalin, you take the East, we'll split it in half. And you say, why would Stalin and Hitler do this if they hate each other? For Hitler, what he's doing is he's gaining a cordial ally in Stalin, showing him he's not a threat, because Hitler is not powerful enough to take on Stalin. Stalin, what does he have to gain from it? By taking the eastern portion of Poland, he gains a buffer zone to his country. So if anyone tries to invade, they have to go through Poland first before they get to the Soviet Union. So it's a win-win on both sides. They both agree. The non-aggression pact says, okay, you don't invade me, I won't invade you, and we'll split Poland in half. And that's exactly what happens. But, okay, World War II has begun. So, where's the United States in all this? The United States has remained neutral to this point. There's no reason for the United States to get involved. We are still picking ourselves out of the gutter of the Great Depression. So, things look really bad over in Europe. And now that World War II has begun, okay, the fighting has begun. All right, one of our allies goes down pretty fast. Okay, the French are not very powerful. They go down. They are now being occupied by the Nazi government in France. This is bad. One of our major allies is hurt. Next up is England. So, there's Hitler's selfie there in front of the Eiffel Tower. What's going on with America and England? Okay, well, America is still vowed, okay, to stay out. Our neutrality acts are still in play. We're still abiding by cash and carry. Now, England is Hitler's next target, and he starts bombing the heck out of England. The biggest advantage England probably has is that England is not physically connected to Europe, right? It's an island nation, and they're not as close, okay, geographically to the rest of Europe. They have subways, they have radar, okay? The pictures here, what Winston Churchill is able to do is he's able to get radar to see when those, the Luftwaffe, the Air Force of the Germans are coming and tell the British people to get underground, and most of them actually go into the subway system, the tunnels there, to avoid being bombed and killed. America recognizes they need to help out their good old friends in England before democracy is done in the world. And they, when I say they, that's FDR and Winston Churchill, they sign what's called the Atlantic Charter, which is a pledge of security to each other and basically to be allies to one another, to prevent all this bad stuff that's happening. And when the war is over, England will pay us back. All right, so we're clearly starting to pick a side, even though we are still claiming we're neutral. Now, speaking of helping our friends, we cannot just sit back and watch democracy die. So we're going to now amend those neutrality acts, that cash and carry policy, one more time to the Lend-Lease Act. Now, this is 1941. This is the same year that Pearl Harbor is going to happen. The United States now issues this policy of the Lend-Lease Act, which means or says that, okay, America will sell or lend war materials to any country whose defense that FDR deems vital to the defense of the United States and democracy. According to FDR, we are the arsenal of democracy. What is he saying? If you know what an arsenal is a place where you stockpile or collect guns and weapons. He's saying without us and our production levels of war goods, democracy is going to fail. So we will bring you, well, now we'll bring our ships to you of our war goods and help you out. But if we don't think that you are part of, this arsenal of democracy, that we are part of our friends, our allies, we're not going to help you. So again, this is really aiming at helping our French and British allies. So again, the question is, are we really neutral? Not really. Okay, so as things continue to heat up, okay, close to war. What's going on with us in Japan? So before we get to Pearl Harbor, it's not really an out of the blue moment, okay? Japan and the United States have been slowly building tension for a while, and I've tried to mention some of these instances over the last few chapters as to why, Japan and the Americans' relationship starts to fall apart. Going back to before, I was talking about we're the ones that opened the doors for them and they wanted to learn. Okay, great. Fast forward though, as we're treating them as these, second-class citizens, if you will, of the countries of the world, we realize and recognize what Japan is doing in building this imperial empire in Asia, and we don't approve. So as FDR orders an embargo against Japan with steel and iron to try to hurt their war machine, if you will, to prevent them from building up a powerful war machine and production of goods. But Japan continues to just take over territory. I told you they colonized Korea, they're invading places in China, they are taking over places in Southeast Asia as well, such as French Indochina. Okay, if you know what that is, that's modern day Vietnam, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a few chapters. Then Roosevelt starts to freeze assets, okay, all ban of oil sales. Now this again is also aimed to hurt their economy to produce war. Now as the Japanese and the United States are trying to negotiate of how to get out of this freeze of assets, we are surprise attacked on December 7th, 1941 at Pearl Harbor. Okay, the tension's been there. We say surprise attack. It's surprise in the sense that we obviously didn't know we were going to be bombed or attacked there. Now, was it a surprise that Japan was coming after us? No, I don't think so. Okay, it definitely was clear that Japan and the United States, our relationship has been deteriorating since the turn of the century. So Pearl Harbor, okay, before 9/11, this is the worst attack on U.S. soil ever, okay, by a foreign country. Hideki Tojo, the militaristic leader in Japan, he's the one that's behind all this. He organizes or orchestrates it. Okay, two waves of not kamikazes. Okay, people get confused. Kamikazes are not around just yet. Those are a tactic used by the Japanese at the end of the war because they're desperate. But they're highly trained pilots, drop bombs, and shoot down and sink a bunch of our ships and aircrafts and kill a lot of people in the process. So as you can see, in less than 2 hours on a Sunday morning, 2,400 Americans are killed, 1,100 are wounded, 21 ships, total are destroyed, 300 aircraft. This is big. This is a huge blow on the United States. Now they chose Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, because this is our biggest Pacific fleet. This is the base. All right, and if they take us out early, then the possibility of us getting involved, obviously they know that we're going to get involved now, but they took us out before we became a serious threat. What the Japanese underestimated was our war machine, our ability to produce war goods and materials. This is going to wake the sleeping giant of American production, manufacturing, our industrial capacity, whatever you want to call it. That's why we get out of the Great Depression here, because we have the ability to produce so much so fast. All right, and obviously people needed jobs. 2 days later, Congress declares war. FDR deems this a day that will forever live in infamy. Pearl Harbor, okay, very, very bad day in our U.S. history. Now, we reenact the Selective Service Act, which you may remember from a couple of weeks ago. That is our draft. We are going to start producing a lot of stuff. Okay, the Lend-Lease Act helping our allies. Okay, also now helping us produce and prepare for war. The role of the federal government during the Great Depression and World War II as well, going to dramatically increase. Okay, if we thought the government and the president was involved in the Civil War, World War I, and the New Deal, well, we're going to maximize now that by like 10 times. Okay, World War II brings a new level of power for the president and the federal government. So, fast forwarding through some of this stuff, okay, talking about people down in the war effort, okay, women, just like World War I, women jumped in World War II and helped out. The famous song as we started this presentation today was Rosie the Riveter. That's this famous poster. Famous World War II song representing and celebrating the idea that women had the power and the ability to take the jobs of the men who are off to war and produce at the same level as the men. On top of that, you're also going to see African Americans as well jump into the workforce, okay, in what we call the second Great Migration, and also African Americans have the ability to join the armed forces. Now, things are still segregated, okay? In the next 2 weeks, we're going to talk a little bit more about the desegregation of all this stuff, but during World War II, the armed forces are also segregated. The Tuskegee Airmen are a famous group that were an all African American fighter jet group that helped shoot down over 400 enemy planes in World War II. So they certainly are to be celebrated. Now we'll speak more about, like I said, the civil rights and social equality a little bit more in a few weeks. However, I mentioned the second Great Migration, the discrimination that obviously is still going on in our country, like the workplaces, the lack of equal pay. There's going to be race riots in major cities during World War II. Sounds like a common theme from World War I and the Civil War because it is. FDR, okay, is going to have to take all these issues into consideration, and African Americans are going to have this what they call double V campaign. It's called double victory campaign, in which African Americans claim they're fighting for victory overseas against fascism and also against racism at home. So we'll bring that up again in chapter 27 a little bit. But a huge push for social equality because of the part that African Americans play. Okay, membership in the NAACP increases during World War II, and CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality, we'll talk a little bit more about them in chapter 27, but formed in 1942 at the beginning of World War II for us, and will fight against discrimination as well. Latinos in World War II will earn 17 congressional medals of honor. That's great. Native Americans, the Navajo Code Talkers, okay, you may have heard of them before. We're going to use Native American languages to decipher Japanese messages, intercept the messages over the radio, which is going to be very helpful for us. How nice the Native Americans, playing a huge role here in World War II, and for how horrible we've treated them during our entire history. Worth mentioning, the Bracero program, 1942 when the World War II begins. This allowed Mexican farm workers to enter the United States with very, relative ease, without a visa, essentially, to help produce food for the soldiers overseas, because obviously we need to make sure that our food production levels are higher. By 1945, 12.5 million men and women in America are in uniform in the Army, mobilized into the war. That's a lot of people with now jobs. One of the other things that we do, the War Productions Board, okay, allocates resources for the war, very similar to World War I. The Office of Price Administration, again, talking about the rationing of goods, making sure that people aren't eating, consuming too much food, save some for the soldiers overseas. There's also, though, one more thing, and that's the Office of Research and Development, which is behind the Manhattan Project. Now, the Manhattan Project is a very top secret project in which we are going to help create the world's first ever atomic bomb. Okay, so the sides are set. Okay, we have the Axis powers, which are Germany, Italy, and Japan, versus the Allied powers, which are England, France, America, and now the Soviet Union. All right, these are the Allies versus the Axis powers. Okay, so definitely be aware of the two sides for obvious reasons. I'm really going to go fast through the strategy here and how we win World War II because it's really not necessary to know, but it might be nice contextual information in an essay. So, now that America's involved, how do we beat Hitler? The thinking is we can't hit him head on, okay? We can't just invade Germany right away. He's too powerful. Hit him in the weakest parts, and that would be North Africa. Future President General Dwight D. Eisenhower leads troops into North Africa. They help take back North Africa from Italy and Hitler, and from there they'll jump to Italy, and Italy will be a little bit of a fight, and eventually Italy will be captured by 1943. Most of the major parts of Italy are taken back. From there, we are going to organize D-Day, Demolition Day. Okay, Eisenhower, once again, one of the main orchestrators of this event, stormed the beaches of Normandy, France, because Normandy, France, remember, is under the control of the Nazis. Obviously, I could spend an entire day talking about D-Day, but we don't have that time. Largest amphibious invasion in history, that's sea to land. From there, we help out our French brethren. We can help push back the Germans. One of the last big pushes is something called Battle of the Bulge, in which, okay, again, we're trying to push into Germany. Very successful for the United States and the Allies, and we're now getting into the heart of Germany. Now, what happened to the Soviet Union? Because I thought, we talked about the non-aggression pact earlier, and how Hitler and Stalin were at a time, friends and coexisted. Hitler's going to go back on that non-aggression pact and invade the Soviet Union in 1941, which formally ends that non-aggression pact. But then it's going to be bitter fighting from there on out. Okay, the rest of the war, it's going to be very brutal. Block by block, house by house, sometimes hand-to-hand combat. Okay, brutal. Some of the worst fighting of the war goes down here in Stalingrad between the Germans and the Russians. No United States help. Okay, we did not help out Stalin. He really wanted us to help out, but we felt it was too dangerous. There was no way we were gonna, help them out. We was walking into a bloodbath essentially. But essentially, alone, without any help, Stalin is able to push back the German troops back into Poland, back into Germany. And you have the Soviet Union fighting Hitler on the Eastern Front, and the Allies, England, France, and America on the Western Front, pushing all back into Germany. And the end is in sight. Okay, all the Soviets and the Allies are blocks away from capturing Hitler. He kills himself. Okay, he gives his dog cyanide. His dog dies. He gives his new wife, his high school sweetheart, some cyanide and a gun. Kills herself, and then he himself takes cyanide and a gun, shoots himself in the head, and he dies. Victory in Europe Day is accomplished by May 8th, 1945. That's great. That's wonderful. There'll be a couple more conferences to kind of clear up what we're going to do with Europe after the war is over. But we'll talk a little bit more about Casablanca, Tehran, and Yalta, really with the next chapter with the Cold War. So stay tuned. But the war's over yet, okay? We said victory in Europe, not the end of World War II. We still have a whole other half of the war to fight. Problem is, one of our leaders dies. FDR, the guy who led us, through the Great Depression and through World War II, the only president who's ever been elected to 4 terms as president, has now died. All right, his new VP, okay, Harry S. Truman, takes the oath of office, as we can see here, and he is now the 33rd president of the United States. He is going to be known for a very controversial decision, as we'll see in a few moments. So what's going on with the war in the Pacific? The war in the Pacific was not going well for us in the beginning. We had to retreat across a lot of our territorial gains in the Pacific. Since Pearl Harbor, we were attacked at the same time simultaneously at all of our possessions in the Pacific Ocean. So yeah, Pearl Harbor happened, but the Japanese attacked us everywhere we were. And we had to retreat. And MacArthur, the guy who was in command of that bonus army incident, okay, MacArthur is going to have to leave. He retreats. He's very upset. but we're going to make our way back little by little. And we do this through what's called an island hopping campaign, from one island to another, slowly getting back our territories until we get to mainland Japan. Some major battles here, again, you don't really have to know this. The Battle of the Coral Sea, do little raids, the Battle of Midway. They just made a movie about that, actually. Big win for the United States here in the Battle of Midway, by the way. About midway between the United States and Japan. Makes sense. We surprise attacked the Japanese, actually, in their naval fleet, and we basically destroyed their entire naval fleet, which is a huge victory for the United States, as you can imagine, which will help us gain back some more land as we get closer to Japan. Now that Japan is really hurting and the end of the war is in sight, this is when kamikazes start to come around. Kamikazes are suicide bombers, essentially, that are in planes, and these pilots are not very well trained. They're usually young, and they're sacrificing themselves for their country. Now, two major battles. Again, you don't have to know them, but they're infamous from World War II. If you're really passionate about this topic, that's great. You should look more into this. The battles of Iwo Jima and Okinawa are two of the bloodiest battles in world history, I should say. So many people die, so many Americans and Japanese die because the Japanese were willing to fight to the last man. They saw the Americans as savages and that we were going to capture them and torture them and do really bad things to them. So a lot of them will fight to the last man because they'd rather die than be captured by the Americans. Some of the women and children on those islands were even seen flinging themselves off the cliffs to rather die, like I said, than be captured by the Americans. So very, very crazy to think about. Now let's talk about how the war really comes to an end. And it really comes to an end with this project I mentioned before, the Manhattan Project. Long story, let's make it short. Albert Einstein, probably heard of him before, really famous for making tacos. Just kidding, I wish. Albert Einstein, a famous scientist, he had once upon a time lived in Germany. He flees Germany once Hitler comes to power. He comes to America. He writes FDR a letter and says, hey, listen, I got an idea to split an atom. It's going to become a really dangerous bomb, and I don't want the Germans to have it, so I think America should make it. So we do. FDR puts this guy, Robert Oppenheimer, in control of making this atomic bomb. Top secret, nobody knows. 600,000 Americans were involved in making the bomb, and most of them didn't even know about it. When Truman is sworn in as president, when FDR dies, he wasn't even aware of it until now he is president. Now, decision time. The bomb is ready. Truman gets word in Potsdam, which we'll talk a little bit more about next chapter. He gets word that the atomic bomb is ready to be used. Should we use it or shouldn't we? Huge debate in history, okay? And, the reasons to use it could end the war, okay? Again, we have to remember that the Japanese were fighting to the last person. And if these small islands like Iwo Jima and Okinawa, they were fighting to the last person, what's going to happen when we invade Japan? Will every Japanese person fight till the end? Because that's the way it's looking. Will the bomb force an unconditional surrender, where they surrender without asking for anything? That's unconditional surrender. And so Truman, as we know, is going to decide to use the bomb. And on August 6, 1945, the United States drops the world's first ever atomic bomb named Little Boy on Hiroshima, Japan. That's right, Hiroshima, the real way to say it. Still no concession, okay? They still don't give up. 2 days later, the Soviets say, okay, we should probably get involved now. This way we get something out of the whole thing. They get involved 2 days later after the first atomic bomb, and they invade Manchuria. Well, now things are really looking bad for the Japanese. The end is near. The day after that, August 9, 1945, the atomic bomb named Fat Boy is dropped on Nagasaki. Huge devastation. Again, it's a topic I wish I could spend more time on, but people were decimated, right? A lot of people died instantly. If you didn't die instantly, you died from radiation, you died from the heat, you were incinerated, crushed by buildings. There's so many horrible things that were done. And there's so many violations of humanity, obviously, and that's why we have thankfully never seen an atomic bomb dropped ever again. Nonetheless, the Japanese, after the second bomb, they decide to concede. They give up. August 15, 1945, VJ Day, Victory in Japan Day. The Second World War is over. The Allied powers have defeated the Axis powers. It's all over, thankfully. So much death and destruction. One thing worth noting is the Armenian genocide. which was going on during World War One. You say, what are you talking about? This is World War II, Mr. Mueller. Why is this relevant? Relevant because Hitler gets his ideas from this. Okay, the Armenian genocide, a very horrible piece of history where the Armenians during World War One were almost wiped out by the Ottoman military. Hitler said, listen, nobody even knows about this during World War One because the war covered it up. So he gets the bright idea to conduct his own genocide during World War II, which I'm sure most of us are aware of. All right, so real quick, the Holocaust, as you may know from last year, is a horrible genocide in history by Hitler against the Jewish people, and obviously others are involved as well, like gypsies and lesbians and gays, etc., disabled. Concentration camps were set up, extermination camps were set up by Hitler because he believed in that Aryan superiority. He blamed the Jewish people for a lot of wrongdoings from the Great Depression, and the Holocaust is, one of world history's darkest moments, obviously. Mass destruction of the Europeans, Jews by the Nazis. 6 million Jews, 9 million people overall killed. The ghettos, the extermination camps, just all bad stuff. Um, so horrible, but worth mentioning. And Hitler figured he can get away with it because people didn't really remember about the Armenian genocide in World War One. As a result, the Nuremberg trials are set up to hold these people accountable. The Nazis who did all this, of 24 people that were tried, 19 were convicted and 10 were executed. Obviously you can say way more should have been convicted, but nonetheless, we're holding them accountable for all this bad stuff. Some of these conferences talk a little bit more about in chapter 25, but Yalta is the first meeting of the Allies. As you can see there, Churchill, FDR, and Stalin. Remember, FDR sitting down because he's paralyzed, in which they're starting to talk about what to do with Germany after the war is over, and we'll talk about the 4 occupied zones that they set up next time. As far as Japan, we're going to occupy Japan for about 7 years. Hideki Tojo, he says peace out. He, commits suicide as the war is winding down. Hirohito is going to, that's the emperor right there. Hirohito is going to play nice with good old Douglas MacArthur right there, who's going to occupy Japan. And they make a remarkable recovery. All right, they're one of the United States' closest allies to this day. Their economy is reshaped. They write a constitution. They do remarkably well after World War II. Now, as far as the Japanese and some things to do with Japanese Americans here at home, horrible stuff. When the war was going on, we talked about, during World War One, the very anti-German sentiment that was going on during that time. Well, during World War II, we have a lot of anti-Japanese sentiment during World War II. Now, nativism is at it once again. After Pearl Harbor, we're going to see about 1,400 Japanese Americans living in America. Okay, some of these not even first generation, second and third generation Japanese Americans are placed into internment camps. Not concentration camps, but they're ripped from their homes, their businesses, and they're placed in these camps, surrounded by soldiers to keep an eye on them. Big case that occurs because of this. Okay, Fred Korematsu. He sues the U.S. government saying this is a violation of our rights. You can't do this. And the U.S. government, the Supreme Court says, yes, we can. All right, national security. And so decades later in the 1980s, the United States government will say, my bad, probably wasn't a good idea. That was a violation of your rights. And the families that were affected by this were compensated like $20,000 each, which is really nothing. But internment camps, got to know about it. Korematsu versus the United States, have to know about it. This was all a result of the executive order by good old FDR 9066, which required these Japanese Americans to be placed in internment camps. All right, we're done. The United Nations is formed at the end of World War II. The major allies or winners from the World War are the five staple or permanent nations that set up this new peacekeeping organization. You say, wait, this is like the League of Nations. How is this going to be more successful? The two things the United Nations has are the two things that the League of Nations did not. One, the United States is now involved, and two, they have a standing army. And we'll see how this plays out in chapters ahead. Okay, but the United States, France, England, China, and Russia, or the Soviet Union, are the five first members or original members. And this will be a little bit more successful. All right, ladies and gentlemen, so much to talk about. My apologies, but World War II is obviously a big one. There's so much we could have talked about, but we didn't. That's okay. Hopefully this helped. As always, hit like or subscribe. Other than that, have a great, wonderful day.